for any of you to put any question about Azure Data Services in the link that I have provided in the chat.
Curious about understanding how to implement self-service data infrastructure in Azure Data Platform, right? So, for example, in a company where we would like to give a Synapse workspace for each team and then give their data and then have their own DevOps repository and CI/CD pipeline so they can produce their data and reporting artifacts for themselves. So when I was trying to solution design this workspace DevOps CI/CD using Azure Synapse, I was trying to reference architecture in the Microsoft website and then trying to get some help to see is it achievable? Is anybody done like that? I couldn't find any references or come across any resources. So if someone could give some guidance on it, it would be great help. Thank you.
I can make a stab at this, even though DevOps isn't my area. A place where you may want to look to start, and I'll dig up the link, is a chap called Fabio Braga. He has a great ARM or Bicep template, whichever one you want to use, to set up a modern analytics platform around that. Sorry, I can't type and speak at the same time, so I'll send the link through in a little bit. There's two versions of it out there. One, he's just published again recently. It's an update with some of the newer features of Synapse in it. And with that deployment, you'll get your Synapse workspace, your storage, but also a lot of the complementary services around that. So some cognitive services, some streaming if you're interested in streaming, Power BI integration. So if you look at that, I think it'll give you a very good starting point on how to give these people these sandpit environments where they can work. Then it'll be having a shared data repository, whether that be a data lake, whether it be a relational store, a bit of both, most likely, where they can then, with their data assets that or data products that they've created, that they can share them out. Gary's sharing something which I think is pretty much exactly what you've done, isn't it, Gary? But Gary's done all the hard work around DevOps, and I think to your solution, Gary, I think DevOps is probably one of the most challenging aspects.
Yeah, we haven't got there. You can see that, I take it?
Yes.
So is it Kukala?
Kokila. KK, you can go with, yeah, Kokila. Thank you.
So what you described is exactly what Go1 is currently implementing. So we've got about 24 teams around Go1. This diagram's not up to date. We've got 14 of those teams using their own. So each one of these boxes describes a Synapse workspace with Spark Compute, and they've got obviously SQL on demand, or SQL serverless as its new name is, compute, and the integration runtime available to them. And we allow them full access to that workspace. Awesome. And we give them 2 pieces of storage inside their workspace, one for them to just use internally and one for them to surface to the outside world. And the reason we do that is so that the second one, they can have different permissions on. Okay. So they can give read permissions to other people. All of these workspaces can see the data in the storage behind the storage that underpins our data hub workspace. Now that's just another Synapse environment, right? The difference between them is the permissions, which we use AD groups to control. Oh. Yeah. You asked about DevOps. So every one of those workspaces has got a DevOps project.
Sure.
This is actually one of the areas, as it's just been said, right, where you've yet to get mature. So The silver workspace on the left here is actually my team's workspace, and effectively what happens is one of the teams builds something in their workspace. It then gets moved to this pre-staging area, and then it gets deployed to our data hub. Right, that's our order of precedence. From a DevOps perspective, we've actually got these two workspaces sharing the same Git. So if users here are familiar with how Synapse has the ability to integrate with DevOps and Git, one Synapse workspace does not have to be in one DevOps project. We could actually have all of these workspaces all sharing the same Git. We've chosen not to. That might be a mistake. But anyway, we share the same Git and we share different branches across these two workspaces so that we can easily transfer code from pre-production to production effectively. Yeah.
Sure.
It's very interesting. We then ultimately also have a Power BI workspace for every one of these as well. So that each individual team has their own Power BI workspace. That gives you then the full end-to-end.
Awesome. So it is true. It is true. We can implement this. It's not just I'm something imagining it.
It's not. We've currently got to the point where we've scripted the creation of one of these workspaces. So we basically give the script a name,
Sure.
and it fires off against Azure and creates all of the storage accounts, all of the AD accounts we need, and then somebody goes in and puts in the users in there.
Sure.
Yeah. It creates the DevOps project. The bit that we need to get to next is, can we fire a pipeline? So if I come inside our main project here in DevOps, can we fire a pipeline? So if I come down to say pull requests, so are there any active right now? So these pull requests have been done like today. Yeah. Can we get to the point where we can actually have a pipeline taking that code and saying, all right, currently it's in Team Python's workspace. Can you move that to the data hub for me automatically? That's like the next evolution of CI/CD that we want to achieve inside our organization. And Henry, the chaps at Sun Super revealed that they might have done that already.
Possibly. I know they were working with our fast track engineers. So it may be that they have figured out something in that space. I haven't been speaking to them a while, but now that I've mentioned the fast track engineers, there's a weekly call that anyone can join. It's just an open question format, and on that call, I'll post the link in a moment, are fast track engineers for pretty much all of our Azure services. So you could dial into that call on a Thursday, and you'll have one for infrastructure, one for DevOps, one for Dynamics, data services, anything in there. And actually, one of my customers joined one Thursday, and he had 5 engineers all to himself because nobody else had joined the call. So it's a great opportunity. There's no cost to it, and you can just go in and ask open questions on that. So I'll post a link into the channel. All you need to do is register for that particular session. They also do other informational sessions about specific services, specific capabilities within Azure around security, identity, all of that. So it's a really great forum to register and attend. I'll post a link in a moment.
Awesome. So I think you are
Gary,
muted.
will I be able to get more insight about your implementation? I would like to understand how you're enabling different teams to contribute it on all the stuff. Is there any way to do it? Is there any GitHub project or a Medium article that I can follow you, or YouTube channel?
It'd be nice, wouldn't it? I've done several presentations. I'm happy for you to reach out to me,
Sure.
and I'm happy to share my documentation with you. Yeah, and
Documentation?
I'm not sure.
Whoa, that's
I'm
great.
not sure. I'm not sure I'm the first. There was an article I think Henry found, which was by It wasn't Fabio, it was someone else, by a US Azure engineer that effectively described the same thing.
Sure.
Which was done separately.
James Sarah, was it?
Someone like that, yeah.
Yeah,
but it's
James Sarah had some good stuff.
The thing that you're actually looking at here is, and this is a term that comes from Databricks rather than from Microsoft, but it's a lakehouse model. That's the term, that's the name it's being given, a lakehouse model. But I'm happy to share with anyone. Please reach out to me. I put my email address in the chat channel.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Awesome. So
just as a by the way, it's the bloody hardest thing you've ever done in your life, right? So don't think this is going to be the thing that's going to solve all your problems forever, right? This is actually way harder than setting up a data warehouse and getting a team to produce some reports and stick them in SSRS. Like delivering a self-service model is really hard work.
Yeah, people think when I proposing it, I'm dreaming something. I also feel sometimes, am I really dreaming something? Is it achievable? But I'm still doing a solution design and figuring out what are the different things I can use it. And then the information that you shared now is really helpful. Thank you so much.
Next question.
All right. No, that was a long one. So I'm going to include my question actually, but we're going to cover it later. Why do you believe self-service BI is so difficult? And we'll cover this one later, okay? So thank you, Grammarly. Love you. Right. Right. So I'll start from the top, right? That'll be the easiest way to go about it. You can vote as well. If you want your question to go to the top, you can click the thumbs up. If your question has more votes, I will go after that one as well. Right. So can Azure Synapse Analytics be used as a transactional database for applications? Who wants to give it a go? Tanya, Darren, happy to?
Well, you could use anything for a database if you really want to. Use a notepad file as a CSV. The question is, what sort of response times do you want? Synapse Analytics is not designed as a transactional database. It's designed for analytics, hence the name. For a transactional database, much better off looking at either SQL Server or a Cosmos or something like that, something that's more designed for that transactional nature. I'm going to stop there.
Nice. And Darren, can you give me some examples of things that we can use for transactional nature?
Yeah, so if you're doing key value pairs, you move into something like Cosmo. If you were using something semi-structured where you don't necessarily know the relationship of the data, then you'd stay with Cosmo. If you're using fully relational, then you start with Azure. If it's a greenfield environment, I would start with Azure SQL Database. If you were taking something that's vendor or legacy, you probably find that you need to move to something like managed instance. And then if we move away from the actual Microsoft products, then we can move into some of the other PaaS services, Postgres, etc.
That's one. Henry, do you want to add anything else to that one?
I think maybe just on Tanya's point that you can use anything. So understand, concurrency, performance, these sort of things. The data model. Azure Table Storage is a very underrated service that can provide great throughput. But also Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2, if you're using Parquet or something like that, with query acceleration enabled on the storage service. And if you partition the data correctly, you can get excellent performance out of a system like that. And this is, I suppose, remember what Delta Lake is based on. It's basically Parquet files with schema definitions and Azure storage underneath, and you can get some pretty good performance.
Awesome. I think you smashed that one. So I'll give that one a. Where is the here? So I can come here now. Check that one. More from soft skills point of view, so what are some fundamentals? Okay, let me go again. What are fundamental skills for a graduate? Which skills would you recommend, suppose, for them to learn? Who wants to start with that one?
Isn't everyone just going to mention their favorite?
Yeah, so doesn't that depend on, Azure, even just staying with Azure Data Services, very wide set of skills. It's more what I think the first question you need to look at is what part of data services do you want to be involved in, and that will determine, are you a data architect? Are you a data integrator? Are you doing data visualization? All very different tool sets and all very different skills. Or, do you want to just be a DBA, even though Microsoft says they killed them off 20 years ago?
If they did, they killed me 20 years ago, and I'm still here.
That's right.
Is the question asker out there to qualify that question?
Yeah.
They don't have to speak. They could type it in the chat if they don't want to speak.
Yep.
While we're waiting on that, I think Darren's touched on some very important points. So where do you want to go with your career is going to be fundamental to knowing what skills you need. But bottom line is you need to be able to do research. So you need to know how to look things up online quickly. So you need to know what are some good keywords for different things that you're looking for. I think one of the fundamentals is being able to communicate with other people. And by that, I'm not talking about your ability to speak. I'm talking about your ability to pass ideas from one person to another. I mean, I can speak English till the cows come home, but if I can't articulate the idea, then there's no point me talking. So it comes down to being able to communicate as opposed to being able to talk. That's something that I always look for, particularly in graduates. The other fundamental skill for mine is an ability to learn. So something that we've done in my team is we've just taken on a new CSA. They're not new to the IT world, they're not new to the CSA world, but they are new to the data world. So as part of taking them on, we've had to make sure that they are willing to learn and that they are able to learn that information. So that for me is another fundamental skill. So realistically, communication, ability to learn, and ability to know how to find stuff.
Can I just add something to that?
Please.
I think also that graduates need to also have a mindset when they join an organisation that they're not going to teach them. It's up to that individual. I think those of us that have made successful careers, I'm going to try and talk for everybody now, I'm sorry, will always look back and say, I really taught myself. What I learned at uni was only a foundation. When it came to picking up a particular skill set or learning how a particular technology functions, I taught myself. Nobody taught me. It was hours that I put in that made the difference rather than actually being taught. You can't expect an employer to teach you the skills that you require. I think that, and finding graduates that have that attitude towards their own learning, I think that's actually one of the keys to employing graduates and making those graduates successful.
So for me, that comes down to the 70-20-10 rule. 70% of learning is on the job, 20% will be actively seeking to learn something, and 10% in classroom. And you're lucky if you get that 10% in a classroom. I've had so many employers over the years, and as I said, I've worked in FedGov in so many different ways. When you're a contractor, the only learning you do is what you put yourself through. As a public servant, I did do classes and courses. Some of them were better than others, as is the nature of all courses. And since being in Microsoft, I've taught courses as well. And I'd like to think that the courses that I teach, I'm teaching not only the required material, but other snippets of useful information as you go. Because to me, it's those snippets of information that you get from the instructor that make it worthwhile going to an in-person instruction event, because otherwise you may as well just read a book.
Yep. How many conferences have people in this call been to where you've sat through an entire day conference? You might have travelled the day before to get to it, and there's always something low. But the problem is you can't work out what 5 minutes to turn up to, can you? So you have to be there for the entire 8 hours.
And it's even harder when there's multiple streams of things going on and you've got to figure out which one of those is going to be more beneficial to you. But yeah, I feel you. I feel you.
Yeah, one thing that I would say that I think has helped me, and I don't think it's career specific, I don't think it's industry specific, is being able to diagnose and troubleshoot issues, because a lot of the times what the error message says or what the person says is the problem is not the problem. And being able to dig into it and ask more questions and don't just take the problem at face value is important, even at the fear of upsetting people. The amount of times that, you know, I've said to people, okay, we're going to take this back to square one and we're going to just go through every step. And some people take offense, say, oh, I've been doing this for a long time. Are you saying I don't know how to do my job? And you just say, no, it's just for me to get a clear picture. You're not making an assessment of that person, but you really have to start digging in and troubleshooting. And a classic example, I remember at work one day, somebody said Exchange had crashed in work, and me and the other guy, Outlook stopped working, and we just went into the web version of Outlook, and yeah, it was fine. But everyone else thought Exchange had gone down worldwide and nobody had access to email on the entire planet. And it was just a simple matter of there was a problem with a thick client in our office on that day, and you just go over to the web client, and that was it. But these are little things that trip people up constantly.
Yeah, you need to always get to the source of the problem, whatever it may be. And even if you're just troubleshooting and you hit another problem and another problem and another problem, you're still making progress. So getting past that first error means you've stepped a line down in code, you've moved on to something else.
Yeah.
I still remember being taught how to debug code at uni. And it was literally, if you've got a program that's 100 lines long and you don't know where the problem is, put a breakpoint halfway through. If you get to that breakpoint, you know the problem's in the second half. If you don't, you know it's in the first half. So it's things like that that I've held on to from going to uni. It's certainly not the languages themselves that they taught, because I don't know that half the languages I learned at uni are still in use. But that's what I get for going to uni last century. So yeah, it just depends on what it is you take from these things. But I agree, Henry, the ability to debug and troubleshoot is massive. And also, if you've got that complicated system, one of the places I was working, we had a data warehousing system. So we brought data in from the source, and then it went to here, and then from there it went to here, and here, and from there it went to on 10 different places as well. And one of the things that I became known for there was my ability to know exactly what the flow-on effects were. So if this table broke here, how would that impact these next 5 data warehouses that we cared about? So that even being able to do that is something that's valuable, because you can then start warning people before problems happen to say, right, we've had an error here. That means that this is going to be out for the next X days in that particular instance. So you can actually use that to your advantage to highlight problems before they become problems, which again is a valuable skill. Not saying every grad needs that, maybe later in your career, but worthwhile knowing how to troubleshoot and debug code.
And I might contribute to this one as well, because my first role in our industry was not definitely as a data architect. Yeah, I know that you might be surprised, right? That my first role in the industry was not data architect, actually. But in this business intelligence project, my role actually was to wake up at 4 or 5 a.m. to make sure that the data movement overnight was not failing and making it better if it fails. Right, so that's a skill about diagnostic and troubleshooting that if you learn, if not early in your career, try to learn it, because that is going to help you understand all the other big picture components as well.
I don't know if it's still around, but Kepner Traeger used to run a workshop on troubleshooting, and they actually got you to troubleshoot something in a factory that you could not see that was building something that most people in IT have never built. So it was actually a really good intellectual exercise to troubleshoot something that you could not see. Don't know if they're still around. If they are and you want to learn about troubleshooting, I do recommend that workshop.
Awesome. Maybe you can share the link in the chat and then
Yeah, I'm going to see if I can find them. That was some time ago that I did that workshop.
Maybe more specifically data, there are transferable skills, right? Like understanding different data modeling frameworks, understanding how to classify data, perhaps the mathematics around set theory. Like I have spent quite a reasonable amount of time over the years actually training procedural programmers to become data engineers, and actually sometimes have to take it all the way back to mathematical set theory so that they can understand what's happening in a database. Like there's transferable things like that, which I find very valuable in the candidates that work with me.
Good point. I see Ray sharing a few things in the chat. Experience, that's a thing with Microsoft. Okay, it's a joke. I'm not going to read it. Okay, let's go to the next one because we are going a little bit slow, so we might speed up. You know, when we have open-ended questions as well, they'll take more time, like mine here. But okay. Yeah, go there. Sorry.
Yeah, to Ray's question, yes, MS Access 2 does count. That's actually the first database technology I used and developed. And now I'm in Azure. So it taught me SQL query writing.
It was unique. You didn't even need access, so you could just use the VB against it.
Yep.
You just need the database. Yep.
Yep.
It can also teach skills around relational tables as well.
Yep.
And how to build tables to third normal form or voice code normal form or whatever normal form you want. Speaking of uni, there's some terms I haven't used since uni.
Okay, good pick. We also have, look, we have Aditya Joshi joining today our event. I know Adi, he's a cool guy. Let's go to the next one. So from Omer, we're trying to schedule, you can read the question, right? But I need to read it aloud as well. We're trying to schedule pipelines every 15 minutes, but our pipeline takes around 40 minutes with 1,000 data warehouse units. Do we need to use Azure Data Lake or Databricks? So who wants to give it a go to that one? I don't know, Omer, feel free. I think you are online, and if you're not online, that's all right, because we'll capture the answer now. Who wants to give it a go to that one?
I'll jump in on that one. And we're not going to be able to give you an answer on this because we'd have to look into your pipelines. So what I would say is make sure that your work group classifiers are set correctly on Synapse. That'll be one thing to check. You may not be getting all of the resources in your 1,000 data warehouse units. But back to Gary's point, are the pipelines executing in more of a procedural manner than a set-based manner? So you want to avoid iterating through objects. You want to push data through high volume, high velocity. And that's going to be the key. And what I would say is have a look at the link I posted on Fast Track Live. And maybe have your environment available there, because one of the engineers will be able to jump into a private chat room with you and potentially be able to talk you through the pipeline that you've actually built in Azure Data Factory or Synapse pipelines to help troubleshoot and guide you through your performance issues. Not an answer, I know, but a difficult one to fix.
Okay, let me before we continue, let's change this question for Omer, right? So I want you guys between all of us, let's build so let's say if we want to load as much volume of information as possible, as fast as possible with Azure Synapse Analytics, can you give me a few features or hints that I need to take into account? As an example, use Parquet files, partition the files, enable this, enable that. Can you give me a few hints and tips and tricks to just with the name? That'll be enough. Henry, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, well, definitely your work group classifiers is really important. So understand what's happening within Synapse. Look at the partition strategy that you're using or the distribution strategy that you're using within Synapse. Make sure that that's the correct one. But also you can manage the parallelism settings on your pipelines. So it could be that you're limited to 4 concurrent threads. Let's say it's on a copy activity. You can dial that right up if you need to get the data through faster. So it's troubleshooting again. It's coming down to identify where your bottleneck is, alleviate that one, and then identify where the next one's going to be, alleviate that one until you get the performance level that you need to execute it sub 15 minutes.
Awesome. Any Tanya, Darren, anyone in the call? Yeah.
Don't run the pipeline using the Synapse admin account because it's very, very throttled. Which I've seen people use the admin account because that's how everyone did it in SQL Server, right? Just log in with FA and you can do whatever you need to do, right? Synapse, it's a very restricted resource governor on the admin account.
Yep. And also, depending on what jobs you're running and how you're running them, if you are standing up compute power to run the jobs and you've got multiple jobs that run, if your compute is being destroyed and then recreated every time, then it's going to delay the running of the tasks. So make sure that your compute is enabled to stand up, assuming you are using the same compute over and over. Just make sure that it is enabled to stand up behind the scenes so it's not having to kill it and recreate it every time.
Okay, awesome. Cool. I'll add to that one all those. I think Harry mentioned this in the past. Look at enabling the what's the query accelerator in Azure Data Lake.
Yes, query accelerator is excellent resource.
If you are using clustered column extra indices, make sure that you don't have data skew and that you have enough data for using those indices, heap tables, and all the things. But yeah, there are many things to look at, but the show must go on. And using more data warehouse units is just like trying to use a hammer for every problem, right? So you assign more data warehouse units, it will go faster, but you're not actually solving the underlying challenge.
And it will cost more. Yeah,
I'm sure that hopefully Omer doesn't pay those bills, and hopefully many of us.
No, but still the organisation will pay more.
Yeah,
and as much as I like that idea in some respects, I'm also like, you don't necessarily want that.
That's it. No, that's a good point. I think ensuring that all the organizations they have a good experience with Microsoft, it does include ongoing cost. Right. Another one from Kokila, actually. Could you share some knowledge or data exfiltration on Azure Synapse? Why it is needed? Who wants to tackle that one? If you need more info, just let Kokila know that you need more info, or I can also just delete the question and make, just pretend that it didn't exist.
KK might get upset if you do that, David.
Yeah, no worries. Data filtration, is that related to security, Kokila? Let's try to seek for some clarification.
Actually, I was trying to write an infrastructure as a code for Synapse implementation using Terraform. And then in the GUI of the Azure portal, there was this option called Managed Virtual Network. And then there was some reference related to if you want to enable data exploitation, then you need to be having your Synapse under managed virtual network. And then when I was trying to understand what is this data exploration is all about, so when possibly my Synapse environment will get affected by this, right? So basically the Synapse that I was configuring is under a VNet, protected VNet, but still I was concerned because of the managed aspect of Synapse in the Microsoft side backbone network. Do I really need to have this data exploration protection in all the environment, or is it specific to environment that is open to some kind of not behind the VNet? So I couldn't get hold of the information in the internet about it. So I was wondering if any of you come across this use state.
I have a document. I'm just going to search for it here now, which will probably help. I'll put a link in to it. But really, what they're talking about there is a secure Synapse environment with no public access to it. So basically, all of the resources look as if they're landed within your own physical environment with no public endpoints. And some customers do need that. Some customers don't. So if you have PII data, for example, then yes, we would recommend using the managed VNets to create private endpoints across your Synapse resources. And I'm just posting this link in now. So this is a really good link where it actually discusses the architectures around that and how to run a successful Synapse POC based on your requirements as well. So it's a really useful document. Have a look at it. There's implementation success, POC success, and it talks through the managed VNets if you need that security around it.
Sure. So am I understanding correct? So if we have a PII information in the data lake and then accessing it via Synapse, then it is better to have this protection enabled, is it?
Oh, PII in a data lake, that to me is a separate conversation.
Okay.
It's that's like, where do you host your PII data? I think that's a completely different conversation. That comes down to data classifications, and it may be that PII data stays on premise and is tokenized if it's going to be copied to a data lake. Because do you need PII data for an analytics platform? It depends on the analytics you're performing. So there's a lot of questions around data classification, where you host it, and then how you protect if it is classified, and there's no simple answer to that one, unfortunately.
Oh, sure, I understand that. So the ideal scenario is not taking a PII into data lake at all. Am I understanding that?
Yes, yes.
That's not entirely. That's probably not the best way to look at it.
Yeah,
probably the best way to look at it.
Sorry, Henry.
Let me jump into this one, because look, I've implemented 3 Synapse data warehouse in the past 2 years. None of them have PII information, and the main reason for that is because upfront we have agreed upon the rules on how we were going to be using the data warehouse. I think the answer to your question is it depends, right? But I think you as an architect, a lead, the persons who is going to help deliver that solution, you need to make sure that those rules, they are defined upfront, right? And then you can tell them, okay, this is how we're going to use the product. For you to understand the trend of if you're having more customers or less customers, you don't need PII information, right? But if they need PII information for any of the business cases, as a professional, what I've been doing is try to stay away of that as much as possible until you run into a business case that you don't have any workaround and you need that information.
Yeah, because I lost the whole entire data doing the thing.
Gary, you have
Thank you.
The only point I was going to make was, it's just really in defense of where Henry was coming from. I think what I think Henry is trying to say, or the way to think about that is, if you remove, and actually some of what was just said is the same, if you remove PII from scope, then that's your safest option. That's your quickest option to that compliance. To give you an idea of what we're doing at Go1 when it comes to PII in a data lake, that we do land PII into our data lake, but it's into a storage account that's effectively sealed. And then we will de-identify that data before it's copied into our main data lake that's shared with our other teams across Go1. And then we've got a re-identification process when we need to re-identify users. And we even go down to the point where even the user ID, the known user ID in Go1, so you could go into the Go1 system, put that user ID, and you could find out who it was. Even that has now been de-identified in our data lake, so that even an internal user can't re-identify easily a user from the Go1 platform.
Sure. Thank you for that.
Right, awesome. Yeah, stay away of PII in the analytics solutions. Stay away.
It does simplify it to stay away, but you don't have to.
Yeah, you guys haven't been, I don't know, there's probably some of you have been through GDPR. I had the misfortune of deciding to spend a few of my years working in London in the last few years. And people think that under this GDPR and CCPA and other compliance legislation that, for example, the right to be forgotten is the most important thing. Actually, it's not the most difficult thing to cope with. The most difficult request to cope with is, I'm happy for you to remember my information, but I don't want you to process it in this one particular way. So you imagine trying to do that inside an organization. So the easiest way to run an analytical environment is to not have any PII at all, to de-identify that data and take all of that data out of PII scope. That's the easiest way. But yeah, it's a very, I'm not entirely certain that was what your question was originally about, though, Kukila.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point, I think, Gary. And I think that's sometimes that I even myself, I forget about that. But I'm one of those ones who like to send emails to the companies that I subscribed for a newsletter and let them know that I want my information to be deleted from their systems, you know. I can imagine them in the backend saying, "No, this guy asked for this. We cannot do it." But all right, so let's move on. Next question. So what service would be the best to ingest data from GraphSQL endpoint or GraphQL endpoint?
I'm trying to think of, I actually worked on something around this not so long ago, and I can't remember the name. It's an open source tool that allowed them to query the Gremlin API. And sorry, the name is gone at the moment. But what we ran into as one of the big issues around this was just the skills. People for the skills for graph databases are very few and far between. There's not a lot of people out there with them, unfortunately. And that's probably the toughest thing that we ran into. Even within Microsoft, there's not a lot of our customers utilizing services with graph databases, and just finding internal resources who can advise and assist customers on POCs was tricky.
Does anyone else have anything else to add? I have a little bit of experience of doing this, and the conversation went in two different ways. So where we use Graph to produce a high performance search data set behind the scenes. So if you imagine, so Go1's a training company, every piece of training material, we call them learning objects, has a relationship to other learning objects that are either similar or some kind of recommendation from another, right? So it's a bit like your Netflix. You know, you go into Netflix and you see all different things because they're all mapped in different ways. And we hold that in a graph, and we use the in-memory graph to provide that search interface to our customers. So we went, oh, how can we pull some of that graph data into the data lake? Well, the graph tool that we're using has got a web interface, so it's got a REST interface. So we are pulling some nodes into the data lake using just the REST interface from Azure Data Factory, but in Synapse, pipelines in Synapse. But the conversation went the other way as well, was actually that's a read type environment, a read-only type environment. And we said, actually, we should be pulling the data from the source of truth, which was actually a transactional MySQL database. So we went back and pulled the data from the true source of truth, not this intermediary source of truth.
Right, so there you have we have a few options there. And now the second bit, we come fresh for this one, some of us. So let's put it away, in less than 30 words, what is the position between Synapse and Azure Databricks? When do we use which? So maybe I start with Darren for this one.
So if you were doing a modern data warehouse 3 years ago, you used Databricks, and if you're building one today, you use Synapse. No. No, they are really similar, and a lot of the recommendation, while Synapse is usually a slight version behind where the Databricks release is, it is very much down to what is the skill set of your internal people that are building it. You know, if they come from a long SQL T-SQL background, then the Synapse workspace and analytics is going to be more intuitive to them than learning the Databricks language.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing answer, because you are bringing people to the table, and projects succeed because of people, but they also fail because of people, not technology. Good answer. Let me go to Tanya. Gary, give me a sec.
Can I just say that we're using Synapse Analytics for all of our development environments, but we're currently moving all of our production Spark payloads to Databricks off of Synapse because of performance issues. And we're also moving all of our production SQL serverless payloads to currently the preview feature that Databricks has for SQL serverless. We're an early adopter of the preview feature. So whilst I agree with that's the direction, and we'll probably move all those payloads back in a year or two's time, but certainly if anybody on this call was involved in SQL 2008, you shouldn't have gone until R2. That kind of feels like what Synapse from the SQL serverless and from the Spark pools perspective, which are the two bits that Databricks and Databricks SQL and the preview feature of Databricks SQL serverless aligns directly with. That's my practical experience. I know that's juxtaposition to what was just said, but that's my practical experience.
I mean, valid answer as well from a different point of view. Now, more than 30 words, so I could disqualify the answer for being more than 30 words, but Darren was also more than 30 words. Maybe within less than 30 words, Tanya, would you be able to give us your insights on that question, please?
Didn't we have a session on this last month?
Yeah.
Those are 4 already.
Yeah. Has the video been posted on that?
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, was when's the video going up, and can I reference that before I answer, please?
Yes, you can reference that, and I'll put this video after. Also, Henry?
Yeah, I'm going through this very much with a customer at the moment, and I think the simple way to determine how to select the technology is don't build it around technology. understand the personas who'll be interacting with the platform, understand the tools that they'll be using, and understand the use cases that they need to deliver. And if you can boil that down, then you'll be able to start selecting, well, what technology is going to allow us to serve our organization best.
Awesome. That's great. I'll put yours cooking in the backlog for now. So we cover one from here from our long time attendee, Bertus. How can we determine what type of this SQL managed instance is backed by? What they are running into some I/O issues when traffic is modest. Do you have any DBAs on the call?
I know the answer to this.
So what are you waiting for?
So the answer is, so there's a link between your database size and your I/O. So there's a document about how to increase I/O for managed instance. I'll dig up the link and send it through. But if you have a very small database, underneath, you're going to be provisioned a P10 account, let's say, for example, which is limited to maybe 10,000 IOPS. But if you have a requirement for 50,000 IOPS, you need to increase the storage that's allocated to your managed instance to maybe to a P50 or a P60. And what that means is you have to pre-size the database, even though it's full of white space, so it'll actually consume a disk of that size, and then you'll get the I/O you need on the storage.
The other option is to move it from general purpose to business critical.
Yeah. Very expensive.
It's an expensive option, but it is an option.
It depends on how much your I/O is worth to you.
Yeah.
I like to think that it's not expensive, but less cost effective. Because in Azure, everything is cost effective. All right. That was a good insight, I think, for that one. Bertus, when you watch the video, if you one day watch it, so you please feel free to reach out to any of the amazing people that we have here in the community. For that one, trying to find no such an open-ended question for now. Is it possible to implement a slowly changing dimensions type 2 using Synapse pipeline or dedicated pool store procs or PySpark is the way to go about it? Thanks. I'll give my opinion with this one and then I'll hand it over. So look, I'm a big fan of having a slowly changing dimensions type 2 into a store procs because they are easier to read and the code is easier to shift to a different relational data management system. So if you build a store proc that creates a slowly changing dimension type X from Transact SQL to PL SQL, back to MySQL, and back to SQL Server, it's really easy to do that. Now, to move that transformation between Azure Data Factory to SQL Server Integration Services to another tool, it is quite challenging. And that's the main reason why I love storing that in Transact SQL than any other tool. Can you do it with Synapse pipeline? Yeah, you can do it with mapping data flows. But I prefer not to use that method. That's all. Maybe I'll use that method only if I don't have a database engine that I can take advantage of. So who wants to complement the answer or extend it? I can be totally wrong.
You've given a comprehensive answer, and we have no interest in doing so.
Yeah.
Next question, please, sir.
The PySpark way is about data lake rather than about dedicated, right? So that answer fits the dedicated answer. I'm a little bit confused why PySpark was in the question.
I guess I thought when I read PySpark, I was thinking of notebooks as well. That's my mind.
Which would
went
be the
directly.
data lake answer, right? So that would be,
Yeah.
I'm going to create Parquet files on the data lake in Synapse, not I'm going to create a table, a type 2 table inside Synapse dedicated pool, right? So
yeah. So that's a good point. I think, look, if you use the Delta tables, you can work out with notebooks to create some slowly changing dimensions type 2 as well, right? But
yeah, the key to writing a type 2 notebook on Synapse Data Lake is Delta. If you don't have, I mean, you could do it, right? But if you haven't got the ability to do an update to a row, it's very difficult to close a record in a type 2, right? So Delta allows you that ability to have ACID compliance over the top of your Parquet files. So the key to building a type 2 procedural piece of code, I've said that word again, in a notebook is the use of Delta on the data lake to give you the ACID compliance that you need.
Awesome. Great insights. We'll come back to this one a little bit. I think we had a comment from Dr. Greg Lowe before, actually. If you're running into IO issues, Dr. Greg Lowe, he's recommending actually to get somebody helping you reducing the IOs that you need, actually. And that would make sense. Make your application more efficient and faster, and you'll need less resources.
Yeah, can I just suggest to you there, I was doing work for, let's say, a bank in the last week, and they had things that were costing them a fortune, basically. So, I mean, they had like an end-of-day process that used to run for an hour and a half. They moved it to the cloud into one of these systems, and it ran for 8.5 hours, right? And then they were like, and it was like telephone numbers that they were looking at adding to the cost of the thing to get it to perform back anywhere near that sort of hour or so. But when you really stop and look at what's going on, this is complete nonsense, you know, like you sort of like look and trace the code and see what it's actually doing against the database. It's just an astonishing range of stuff being executed that doesn't need to be executed, you know, or shouldn't be, and so on. And I'm always telling people the way to get SQL Server to scale is stop talking to it, right? I mean, it's the number one rule for getting it to scale. And the thing is, when you move these things to cloud-based stuff, it will hurt you if you don't. Anyway, that's me.
Yeah, that's excellent insights, I think, Greg, because going to the cloud doesn't necessarily make applications faster, just by shifting the infrastructure there. So
actually, they actually bought hardware they thought was bigger. That's what they provisioned. But of course, the thing they never allow for either is the latency change, you know? And even, I mean, it's okay to have a little latency change if you got commands that are doing lots of stuff. But if you're hammering the system with tons and tons and tons of stupid little commands, you can't get away with that, you know, in those environments. To give you an example, out of 1.5 million commands executed against the database, they had 400,000 commands that were asking the database what the primary keys were of the tables. I'm not joking, and these are not changing, right? But it's the library they've used goes to do an update. First thing it does is goes and finds out what the primary keys are of the table. You know, and this is the sort of nonsense that you see, right? And or I see things where they're just endlessly asking if the language settings have changed, or you know, endlessly asking, you know, all these sorts of things. Like it's very easy to code against a library and not know that this is the nonsense it's doing at the back end. Anyway.
Yeah, good point. Great insights there. Okay, so let's search for those yes/no questions. I know that it's 5:55, so we're not going to be able to cover all the questions, right? Because we'll finish here at 8 p.m. Right, so this is, and it's easy for me because I know the product, but is there any best practice suggestion for deciding the data warehouse units level in the dedicated SQL pools? I think, Harry, you're up next with this one because you ran a presentation on this.
Yeah, it's what you need to understand, I suppose, is scale it up for your ETL, and then understand what your use case is after that. So let's say you're just refreshing data in Power BI and you're using the import model, well, then you can shut it down and just keep it off for the rest of the day. If you need to keep it running 24/7, then look at reserve pricing on Synapse. And there's a way to figure out, but you want to, if you're scaling up, let's say to 1,000 and you're running at 500, then just reserve the pricing at 500 for 24/7. And then that scale up, if you're only doing it for an hour or two a day, then you're just paying an extra 500 for that hour or two on the pay-as-you-go pricing. A lot of people don't lock in the reservations, and I think the main reason that they're fearful of doing that is because they see 3 years reserved, and they believe that they're committed to 3 years of using that at that price, and that's not the case. Reserve pricing is not a lock-in. It's like putting a reservation in a hotel. And if you cancel very early or very late, I should say, the fees are a bit higher. So it's just about reserving and understanding what the cancellation may be. I even say to customers, reserve pricing on test dev environments, because if you're running those test dev environments 24/7, let's say it's a VM, it's going to be cheaper to reserve that rather than pay-as-you-go pricing. And if you delete that VM, then those reserved cores just automatically migrate to another VM in that subscription. So it's not like it's pinned to a VM or pinned to a particular service that you've deployed. It's pinned to that service allocation that you've deployed. So definitely look at that, and that'll help with your cost management, I think. Not that the question was around cost management, but that will help you decide on data warehouse units, I think.
Darren, Tanya, would you like to add anything to this one?
I bow to Henry's wisdom on this one.
Yep, I'm with Henry.
Nice. What I like to switch the question around as well. I'll start with what's the budget actually for the solution, and then it's easier for you to work around some of the, let's say, it's easier for you to define how much power you're going to use and how you're going to define the architecture as well. And it's like, look, it's like, I like to think always like, when I go camping, if I'm using a really small car, right, there is so much that I can fit inside the car. And that's all, I cannot do anything about it. So I make sure that I choose the right things to take camping, right? And I don't say, I'm going to get a bus to go camping to do everything. I see a nice hand from Gary. Hey. Yeah, go ahead. Goodbye. Take care, mate. Thanks a lot for your contribution. Okay, we take this one. Now that Gary is gone, we're not going to cover Gary's questions, right? Joking. Now we'll revisit maybe checks on the table. It is this one a yes or no? No. Okay, now that SQL managed instance does integrity checks and takes the database offline on data loss issues, how does Microsoft support reach out to the client admin? I don't know if I understand the question, but you fellows, if you
know that what happened.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, no. So Henry, I heard there's an article out at the moment that says SQL MI now does integrity checks, and if it hits, if the integrity check fails with what would be a data loss issue, it actually takes the database offline, so you can't even see it in the portal. And apparently then Microsoft support reaches out to you to help you to work through how to put it online. I'm wondering how does Microsoft support reach out?
That would be to the Azure admins
Yeah.
who are registered within your environment. So they're the people who receive the monthly bills and can allocate resources at the highest level within Azure. So I would say they would be the people who would be contacted.
Yep.
But that's just a guess.
Yeah, I do agree with you. I think the logic says that for all the things, they'll send an email to
But I was talking to a customer once, and the Azure admin had left the company, and all the emails were going to somebody who no longer worked there, and they were wondering why they weren't getting their monthly bills anymore and why they couldn't do certain things. And yeah, that was not great for them. So have more than one Azure admin, I think, would have redundancy there.
Good one. We'll cover one of the Gary ones actually. So anyone seen Azure Streaming Analytics CPU hitting always 100%? No, I'm not.
I have not. I've only played with Stream Analytics in dev environments, demonstrations. So I haven't used it in anger in a production environment.
What Henry said.
Anybody in the call has used Stream Analytics on running into this issue? I remember looking at Stream Analytics and creating a really big expense for my previous employer.
That's what I was going to say, David.
I didn't see that.
Didn't you leave that on one weekend?
Yeah, and it was not at 100%, and it was a nice $12,000 bill that was cancelled by Microsoft, luckily. Radio. I like the last question, but let's revisit this one from Kokila actually. Could you provide, do you have some direction sample GitHub for implementing data dictionary in Azure Purview, automated or manual?
Given Purview is more of a data discovery than here's some data we've created earlier type tool, I'm not quite sure what you're after here, KK. There are some tools around, and there's a really good Git repo that I will link to in the chat that talks about using the Python or using Python with the Apache Atlas APIs to upload information into Purview or to extract it from Purview. But mostly with Purview, it's create the instance and then put your sources in there and then start running the scans.
Sure. Thank you, Tanya, for that information. Actually, so when I did the POC for Azure Preview, there was this tables where we would like the business analyst and product specialist to give us a note about the particular column or what it is about.
Yep.
And then, so I assume that it is pretty manual, like they have to open the preview and then I have to go and type it. I was wondering, is there any better way to do it, automated way to do it, like if we have it in Excel and then upload it, or and also when we give access to multiple people, how can I make sure that how can I make it production version compared to the version that actually they created in a dev environment or something? Those are the couple of questions, practical questions that come into my mind. Thank you.
So if you've got all of that information that you want to upload, then it's going to be using those APIs that I mentioned from Apache. So I've put a link into the chat of a Git repo that Will Johnson's put together. So he's one of our counterparts over in the UK. And so he's put that together, assuming you're using Python and wish to use those APIs, that's what that repo is about. So that will help you upload where you've got that bulk information to upload. You will, of course, have to know the exact item that you wish to update. Otherwise, it will get a little bit difficult because, of course, we don't want to update everything with the same description. So that's one part of it. When it comes to moving information from development up to production, I haven't really seen a good way of doing this yet within Purview. So Purview, of course, is still a new product, other than moving it from one instance to another. That is one of the few ways I've seen. I know that there are some things coming in that space, but I'm not able to say very much at the moment.
Awesome. Thanks for the response. Much help
Yeah.
it is. Thank you.
Yeah, because that whole migration from changing it from dev to test to prod, that is something that is definitely needed. And at the moment, other than having 3 instances of Purview running, one connected to dev, one to test and one to prod, and then going out and scanning as you make those changes, there's not really a good way of doing that at the moment.
Thank you.
No worries. And Shane, your follow-up question, are there any add-ons for third-party points for Purview, which can give you a data group-based diagram view of discovered assets? Not that I'm aware of, but you can, of course, use those APIs to extract the information, and that will show you all of the tables, etc., that have been discovered within a particular database or data source, because it doesn't have to be a database, that you can then use to create whatever views you want around those tables and how you would join them together. I do know that Purview now has got a connector into Irwin, I think it is. So you can actually, if you've got that diagram already, you can then import that into Purview.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Tanya.
No worries. Thank you for the questions.
I'll add to this one. I'd like to see Azure Purview as in many cases, like a shared service across subscriptions and environments, as a hub service.
Yep.
I don't really like to have one Azure Purview per the environment, like a dev, test, prod. I don't believe like it applies that way. It's like saying, from my point of view, on humble opinion, right? It's like saying that you want an express route for dev, test, prod, and things like that, right? So I think it's more like a shared service.
It can be useful if you take, so I may have worked with some organisations that take upwards of 3 months to get something from dev to prod. So if you are looking at what's in dev at the moment, it can be useful to have those different instances of Purview, so that if you are only looking at prod and what's currently there, you know that what you're looking at is guaranteed production. So there can be reasons behind it, but if you're working in an environment where it goes from dev to prod very quickly, then I'm in agreement with you, David. 1 would be enough.
So we'll mark these two more to the bucket. Unless, sorry, Henry, Darren, do you want to add anything to this 2 Azure Purview ones?
No, I'm good.
No.
Awesome. We might start wrapping up. Why can we answer
Why is
this one
self-service BI so difficult?
with 5? Give me the short version answer. The shortest answer possible.
Red tape. So every organisation I've worked with that's trying to do self-service BI makes it difficult on themselves. They introduce so many problems and so many requirements around it that it just becomes impossible. That's been my experience anyway.
Awesome. Darren, the shortest version for this one?
Yeah, I think when a lot of them get set up, they don't actually understand what the end users and what the different personas actually require, and don't necessarily train them how to use the tools properly either.
Whoa, amazing. Yeah. And Henry, do you want to expand on this one a little bit, or?
Nah, I'll be good on that one. I think the guys took the main ones there.
Yeah. I think this self-service BI is where people is in the center, and many times we forget about that.